Hey everybody, welcome to video 50. Today's an interesting one for the cardiopulmonary unit where we get to talk about a few of the diseases that you can have of the cardiovascular system, and then some of the medicines and other associated differences that we might see, or human interactions that we might see as we try to alter the cardiopulmonary system. So the first one that we'll go over here is sickle cell anemia. You may have heard of this one. It's a potentially fatal disease that is genetic. With sickle cell anemia, your erythrocytes in the hemoglobin is abnormal, and so your erythrocytes have a sickle shape, and so that's why it's called sickle cell anemia. This abnormal hemoglobin can be a very solid crystal, and so normally your erythrocytes are kind of rubbery and can bend a little bit. But with sickle cell anemia, they're pretty solid crystals, so they don't have any bend to them. And as a result, as those erythrocytes are going through very, very small blood vessels, they can get caught. Because normally your erythrocytes are going to kind of bend and fold to get themselves to fit through that very narrow blood vessel. But with sickle cells, they won't be able to do that, and so they can block that blood vessel and cause a stroke, and even rupture that blood vessel. Sickle cell, we'll look at a Punnett square here on the next slide, but it is a recessive trait, and so you need to be homozygous recessive in order to be suffering the full effects of sickle cell anemia. But we do see, interestingly, in some third world countries where malaria is quite common, you actually want to be heterozygous for it. So heterozygous individuals for sickle cell anemia do show some of the effects. They might have some sickled cells. It's kind of a weird deal, but they don't have the full effects of sickle cell anemia. They aren't at risk of strokes like this. But interestingly enough, though, those malaria-carrying mosquitoes are much less likely to transmit malaria to individuals that are heterozygous. If you are homozygous dominant and have no sickle cell alleles in you, however, you are much more likely to catch malaria and then end up dying from malaria. Here you can see the difference. Here's a sickle-shaped cell, and here's what your normal erythrocytes should look like. And here is the Punnett squares, so you can see here having the sickle cell trait, this S here. These individuals would be heterozygous, this SA, HB just being hemoglobin. So they'd be heterozygous, so they would have some sickle cell trait to them. They wouldn't be suffering the full effects of an SS individual here. But the reason that the sickle cell trait continues to stick around, as opposed to you think natural selection would eventually get rid of that sickle cell trait from those people all dying before they're able to pass on their genes. But heterozygous individuals in third world countries have a higher survival rate. They're actually able to survive malaria better, and so as a result, they end up having a 50% chance of still passing down that sickle cell trait like we have in this individual over on the left-hand side here. So if you end up with two heterozygous individuals having offspring, then there is that 25% chance that they would have a child that has the full sickle cell anemia disorder, and then they are eventually they're at a much higher risk of a premature death due to sickle cell anemia. So natural selection is actually kind of depends on where you are. Here in the States, it's directional stabilization. It's trying to get rid of all the sickle cell traits, but in third world countries, it's stabilizing selection, where it actually is selecting for the heterozygotes because they have the higher fitness, but it does result in that sickle cell trait sticking around. Another interesting one is blood doping. You may remember this. Lance Armstrong was an American cyclist. He won 7 Tour de France titles, but eventually was found that he had blood doped his entire career, and so he actually got those 7 titles taken away. Blood doping occurs when an individual is going to have a bunch of erythrocytes. Basically, you're going to have their blood drawn several weeks before competition. So you go in, hey, I have, if you're Lance Armstrong here, you have the Tour de France in 2 months, you're going to get blood drawn. Those erythrocytes are going to be frozen and kept in an area where they're going to be able to be kept alive but frozen, just kind of inert. And then just before competition, you're going to warm them up and return them back into your blood. And what that does is basically now you have all these extra erythrocytes because your body regenerated those that it lost from the blood draw. And so you got yourself back to your normal erythrocyte levels. But then you get this influx of new erythrocytes. And so you get a whole lot of extra erythrocytes. And the theory is if you have more erythrocytes, they all carry oxygen, so it must increase your oxygen carrying capacity. And especially for a cyclist, being able to efficiently carry oxygen to your muscles is really, really big. And so it's thought that is going to improve your performance. Outlawed in 1986, and it's still a very dangerous technique, blood doping, unless you're doing it through a clinic that's going to do it for anemic individuals. But things with blood doping, you get really, really high blood pressure because basically you have your normal amount of blood and then you're putting a lot more blood into you. And so you have all this extra blood pressure. You're in danger of a lot of things from that. And then not to mention, it doesn't necessarily, it's not straightforward that it actually works, especially with that high blood pressure and the amount of extra work it's going to put on your heart. But we do see it actually used in anemic individuals as a treatment. If they'll get a blood draw, and then if they are really low on erythrocytes, they will get that infusion of their own erythrocytes. That way you don't have to worry about transfusions or anything like that, and the blood being rejected in order to kind of replenish their oxygen carrying capabilities. Speaking of blood transfusions, they are one of the great advances in modern medicine, but they've always carried a risk, especially if it's not your own blood that's being transferred into you. They always have this risk based on blood typing. So we talked about ABO classifications. We talked about the RH factor. You also have to worry about bloodborne pathogens like HIV and everything. So if you work a job, they probably had you go through a lot of like how to use personal protective equipment, PPE, especially when there's blood. They always say, you need to wear glasses, you need to wear gloves, all this stuff. That's because we're worried about those bloodborne pathogens. You don't want to transfer bloodborne pathogens because you don't know if this individual is HIV positive or not. And so you don't want that blood to mix and potentially put you at risk for HIV. So to combat this, there are certain companies, Polyheme is just one, that is trying to develop artificial blood. For Polyheme, what they're doing is they're trying to take expired human blood, so blood that's been donated but has since expired, and they're trying to treat it with chemicals in order to remove the ABO type, to remove the RH factor, and to remove any bloodborne pathogens, and thus make it safe to be able to put back into a human even if it's expired. Other products are being developed. Other products, they're trying to create hemoglobin without using human blood. It can be difficult to create hemoglobin without kind of starting with human blood and working from there. But it does pose some other issues here. You can see this question I pose: why might it be important to develop artificial blood without real blood? And if you want to pause, you can think about that. I'm just going to go ahead and say the answer here is that in a lot of religions, the use of blood products is forbidden. And so there's been several court cases where somebody needs a blood transfusion, say a child needs a blood transfusion, and the parents won't allow the doctors to give a blood transfusion to their child because their religion is against the use of blood products. And so artificial blood would get around this problem. They're okay with artificial blood because it doesn't use any real blood. It's basically synthetic. And so if that synthetic blood is then able to be put back into their child as a blood transfusion and it still work, that kind of works around, it sounds bad, but it sounds like a loophole in the religion in order to be able to save that child's life. And then we'll just finish on transfusions here. We've talked about them a lot here. We've talked about blood typing in the past. AB positive, we mentioned, is the universal acceptor. That's what you want to be if you need a blood transfusion, because you can receive blood from anybody. AB, O blood, and it doesn't matter the Rh factor because you have it in your blood, and so it's going to recognize that as a self-antigen. O negative is the universal donor, but as a result, they can only accept blood from O negative individuals. Type A, type B, type AB blood is not going to work for them. Anything with that's positive, even O positive, will not work for these individuals because they do not have the Rh factor in their blood. And so as a result, anything with an Rh factor is going to be recognized as a foreign antigen or antibody or antigen, and so they're going to be attacking it. Here's what we're going to be playing in class. Hopefully it works. This link has worked sometimes in the past, sometimes it hasn't. So hopefully this link works in class. So those are just a few things on some of the diseases and some of the medicine that we have surrounding blood and blood typing, blood transfusions, and things like that. So hopefully that all made sense. If you have any questions, make sure you're asking.